Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're excited to be sitting down with one of our more recent Harrison Goodall Fellows, but they also serve as the manager of the Hope Crew at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We're talking about Molly Baker, and we're going to be talking to Molly all about the work that she did in building sort of a legacy in the trades and what the work of her fellowship focused on as a Harrison Goodall Fellow, what that looked like, and how that may impact the field and how people who are interested in historic trades can learn more about this project. But before we get there, we like to get to know people and sort of what drives them and their passion in preservation. So Molly, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up and what led you to this kind of work?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me, Nick. I'm really happy to talk about this work. It meant a lot to be able to explore this issue over the last year, and I'm exceedingly grateful for Harrison for providing the Goodall Fellowship. But yeah, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Ohio and lived in a series of historic homes, but never really had the language to talk about building preservation or restoration, but had a fondness for the built environment by living in these historic homes. And then as an adult, moved to Wheeling, West Virginia. And in Wheeling, it was one of the wealthiest cities per capita at the turn of the 20th century. And there's beautiful architecture that reflects that. But due to industry leaving the area, population decline, you saw the effects of age on these buildings and disuse. And there began a trend of tear down. And I was looking around, also a historic home owner in Wheeling, looking around at this trend and wanting to do something to help, but not knowing what that would be. And I had a chance encounter with a woman that was studying building preservation trades at Belmont College. And that conversation changed my whole trajectory. It was exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for a career change, wanted something that I felt really passionate about. And it just felt like in that moment, like lightning, it strikes. It's just that those moments that you look back on that seem meant to be in some way. And that interaction changed everything. I was enrolled in Belmont within, I guess, about 9 months. Went through that program before I even graduated, had a job in Louisiana. And while I was in Louisiana, went on to get a degree in history. And that kind of snowballed into landing at the trust. We had a project at the site I was managing that engaged Hope Crew. And I just knew that's what I wanted to do next. I wanted to work with that program. I wanted to get people excited about building preservation trades. And when that opening came up at the trust, I was so honored that they took me on. And I've been with the trust for about going on 6 years now.
So for people listening who are, well, actually, I kind of want to jump back at first. Because people might be listening and are like curious about all these different pieces, and I want to make sure we define them. So Belmont, tell people what Belmont is, because it's pretty unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Belmont College is in St. Clairsville, Ohio, on the eastern side of Ohio near West Virginia. And it is a 2-year program where you really get the theory and automatically right into the field doing practice at field houses in the community, so that direct hands-on right after you learn the theory. So courses look like carpentry. So you're learning wood species and how to address issues that you would come up with in historic wood. And then you go right from the classroom to a lab and you're applying that in real world scenarios. And so that application really helps you be an effective person when you leave that program. I can't speak highly enough about it. I feel that it is something that is unique in the way that it offers both the theory and the hands-on in a short 2-year program.
Yeah, and it's so funny how often, I mean, preservation is a small world. Preservation trades is an even smaller world right now. We're trying to make it bigger. But so often we run across really competent, highly skilled people who went to Belmont. So there's there's something in that Ohio water there. So all
And
right,
the
so we've
program
got
facilitators, they're
and the
amazing
program
too.
facilitators. Yeah, yeah, there's something special and magic there though.
Absolutely.
So all right, now I want to define Hope Crew. So people are listening
Yeah.
and are like, the Hope Crew. So what
Yeah.
is the Hope Crew? Obviously, like all good sort of quasi National Trust is not government, but you work with them close enough, so you have to have an acronym.
Yeah.
So what does it stand for, and what does it do?
Yep, it's an acronym for sure. It's hands-on preservation experience. So Hope Crew was formed 10 years ago with the goal of engaging a younger and more diverse audience and building preservation trades. So that is usually 2 to 6 week training opportunities across the nation at historic sites, historic buildings, working with local youth serving organizations and teaching their participants these skills and hopefully getting them excited about building preservation trades as an option. And then we also, in addition to having those experiences, we love to align the participants with other existing programs like Belmont, like some of these wonderful core models that are popping up across the nation. We just had a conversation at the Trust with facilitators from the Conservation Corps in Boston that has the preservation trades training, and the one in Minnesota that's teaching students how to, or young adults how to work on historic buildings. Northern Bedrock
Northern
program is
Bedrock,
that.
and I think
Yeah.
SCA is the other one.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then Ancestral Lands, which is a great initiative where students that are Native American work on special places of Native American significance. So there's programs across the nation. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to get people excited and put into these programs. So yeah, we've
Yeah.
been doing it for 10 years. We're really proud
Which
of that.
I think is so important too, because I think as we mentioned, hope and other things like it's sort of like an experience. It's to try and capture excitement and then kind of hand them off to the next thing. Because as you know, like becoming an accomplished journeyman tradesperson is a longer process, obviously,
Mhm.
than 3 weeks or something like that. But you have to have that first touch. You have to have the experience you had where you met the person. You're like, wow, this is really cool. I want to do it. And hope is one way of doing that, and there are others that are even trying to capture kids even younger.
Yeah.
And it's such an important part. I think a lot of times we jump to the apprenticeship and we jump to the more formal part, which is really important and it has to be there. But it's a whole life cycle of engaging people in the trades. You can't just hope that if you have an apprenticeship program or some type of training program that it's going to work. You have to have people aware of it and know what it means, and have an opportunity to try something out before they commit their life to becoming,
Yeah.
whatever the kind of trades people it might be. So there's a lot of different directions that you can go in the trades. Not only physically, like you could be a carpenter versus a mason or whatever, but there's a lot of different ways that somebody who's interested from your side could impact the trades. So professionally, day to day, you're working at the Hope Crew, which is one really important way. But through the fellowship, what were you hoping to impact? What was the challenge that you were hoping to solve?
Yeah. So through my work with Hope Crew, we're going to different places across the nation, and we're over and over again hearing about the need for additional training opportunities. There's so many great things out there, but a lot of times the location is a deterrent for people joining in these programs that exist. And there's other factors, the cost. So I wanted to provide a roadmap that helps somebody create a small regional program in their vicinity. So if there's a rural area that has a great need for some skill that pertains to building preservation trades, I wanted to have the step-by-step model of how to get there. So there's so much great information out there. I just wanted to connect the dots so that there was this guide, this roadmap of sorts, so that somebody could explore the idea of creating their own program.
So it's fascinating, and like I think like full disclosure background here. Most people know that Preservation Maryland powers PreserveCast, but Preservation Maryland is also the home of an organization and a project program called the Campaign for Historic Trades. And like one of the number one questions that the campaign gets is, or I want to start a program. And I'm sure anybody, I'm sure the National Trust gets this. We've all
Mhm.
heard this, like, I want to start a program. And sometimes starting a program is a good idea. Sometimes it's not a good idea. And you should partner with somebody else. And so
Yes.
having like a roadmap around this is so important. I'm curious, like, what are the big lessons learned? Were there things that going into this surprised you? Um, Maybe we'll start there. Were there any surprises?
Um, Not so much a surprise, but a feeling that deepened my belief in that the preservation trades field has this need. Was the willingness of other program facilitators to share their wins, share their process, share how they got to these successful programs, because they were so aware of the need and they didn't feel like it was a competitive thing to create more opportunities for trades training programs. They thought it was exactly what was needed. So it just reinforced my belief in that this is useful and needed, how willing people were to share. And I really stand on their shoulders, their successes, learning about how they launched these programs and what worked, what didn't, and use that to fit together this roadmap in a logical way.
Yeah, because not only there have been successes, but there have been failures, and so we can kind of
Absolutely.
learn from those. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people sometimes joke about like the autopsy report, like
Yep.
why did they die? What
Yep.
happened, and how can we avoid those? So somebody's listening today, and they're like, you know what, I want to have one of these in East Peoria or wherever I'm tuning in from. What are some like initial things to think about? Like, what are sort of the Baker's top 10 here?
Yeah. So I started the guide with having someone identify their participants. To me, that's the most important thing. Who are you going to be? Who are going to be your beneficiaries of this program? Because that helps you shape it. So if it's say students that are graduating from high school but not necessarily on the college track, how do you gain their attention? How do you build a program that works for them? Or how do you partner with existing organizations to just give them this boost in what they're already learning? Or if they're already engaged in, say, community college programs such as construction management, how can you overlay preservation trades training onto what already exists? So I think the first key is identifying your participants. And then from there, you're going to look for local partnership. The way the trust certainly operates, and many of these programs that we talked there that I talked with and forming the guide really pointed to partnership as being key. So it's building those partners. One of the really wonderful things that Campaign for Historic Trades has been doing is building curriculum, open source curriculum. And that was one of those pieces that over and over again we heard, like, is there a standard curriculum for this? And through the 10 years of Hope Care, there hasn't been, but by means of this work, that is going to revolutionize the training opportunities that'll be out there as having a curriculum. From there, being strategic about implementation. That was one of the biggest things I heard from the existing programs is that phase, those steps in implementation that are outlined in the guide that I created are really key to success. So it's not only thinking through that launch, what does year one look like? What does year two look like? Focusing on your ultimate goals and who you're engaging. And then, some of the more brass tacks things, budget, insurance, fundraising. The guide covers those as well by pointing to wonderful resources that are out there. So thinking through what are the costs based on what you've decided this program is going to look like. What are your costs? Here are some of the traditional costs you can expect, but here are some other ideas of what you might run into. Or, insurance with working with students. Sometimes that can be a tricky thing to acquire. So pointing to the programs that have had success, where they went to, how they acquired insurance, and then fundraising. One of the more tricky things I think people think about when they're starting a program, but in my experience, there's so much enthusiasm about engaging younger people in these opportunities. Funding doesn't have to be the biggest hurdle in forming these. So even pointing to ways to acquire funding within the guide, those are the kind of the outline of how the guide exists and is hopefully useful to people trying to create a program.
This isn't just something that's valuable even for trades training. I feel like it's almost just really sound project management advice. But so it's good for anybody, even if you're not planning on running a trades program. But I think particularly for that, some of the big things that I took away that I just think are really helpful and like that I want to underscore is that like it's not one size fits all. And sort of like marketing, when you sit down or you think about your marketing, you're like, well, who are we trying to market to? It can't be everyone. And I think that there's a misconception there. And I love the part that you really lean into about partnership, like find out what it is you're good at. And I also think that that's helpful too, because like some groups that we hear from are like, well, we can't really take on training. That's fine. But maybe you can be the part that markets it, or maybe you can be the part that fundraises for it. Or there's a role for a lot of different people in this. And I think for existing preservation groups out there, they can think about it from that perspective, because it seems like a lot to do all at once. Like you have to like boil the ocean, but you kind of just have to pick out one piece that you're good at. So yeah, I think that there's like just some really good sound takeaways for anybody who's thinking about doing this, or even just like curious about the trades and how their preservation group or their historical society might look at this. So even if you're listening to this and you're like, well, we're not really planning on running a trades program of our own, that's fine. But maybe you present opportunities to just even talk about it, or present places where kids can learn a little bit more about it. It doesn't have to be a full-blown 3-year apprenticeship program that you run. You can't, you don't have to go from 0 to 60.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to reiterate on the partnership level, there's ways that people in your community are already doing these things, that it would just be a easy lift for them to add, or maybe not easy, but a smaller lift for them to add one extra little level to what they're doing to support a program like this. For instance, a high school technical trades program. We in Hope Crew have worked with carpentry programs, painting programs, where we're just coming in and adding a little bit more knowledge to what they're already learning. And then they get to leave that program with this additional experience. It can be something as simple as that. Or there's the success in Rhode Island with the contractor training. And that was a partnership with Campaign for Historic Trades, I believe. They offer the opportunity to existing trades practitioners to learn these additional skills around masonry, around carpentry, window restoration. And it was a great success. There's all different ways that we can meet people where they're at. And partnership to me is the key to making that happen in anyone's area if they really desire to do so.
Yeah. And I think upskilling is kind of what you're describing, where you're like trying to take somebody who already knows a lot and then to kind of add on to that. So, I mean, the scale of the challenge is immense. You're doing this because you saw the need for this. Has it been picked up and used yet, like the guide? And for people listening who are like, well, I want a copy of this guide, where do they go to get it?
Yeah, well, I built a website to go along with it. I'm hoping maybe we can plug this into the description of the podcast. But yeah, there's a website. It's downloadable. It's free. It's something that I'm hoping to get feedback from. I've already distributed it to several organizations that are looking to start programs. So there's 3 programs out there now that have been going over the guide and hoping to use the keys from the guide to support their program development. But it's something that I intend to stick with. I want to hear feedback. I want to hear if there was something that was missing. This was a 1-year effort. Certainly in 1 year, I could do quite a bit of research, but not test it in the way that I really want to test it and make sure that it's effective. I want this to be useful to people. So I'm hoping to get feedback, what was good, what needs improvement, and make it something that's evolving based on that feedback.
And so for people, we will put a link in the show notes, but why don't you just say that URL out there so everybody can hear it?
Yes, absolutely. So it's preservationtradesprogramcreationguide.com.
Easy, rolls right off the tongue. We'll get it.
Yep.
And we'll put a link in the show notes, as Molly said, because it really is worth looking at. Like I said, whether or not you're thinking about a trades program, just to kind of put you in that frame of mind. If you're working even at a museum that stewards a historic resource, are there ways for your museum to get young kids aware that this is even, an option, and just to be thinking through this, because you heard from, Molly's own story that it took that conversation, that sort of that trade trade spark to get her, thinking about this, and your institution could be that. And, it goes from there all the way to full blown trades programs and what it takes to put these together. And it does take a lot of effort and a lot of different skill sets. And I think building a team, whether that be a team at your organization or a team of partnership through different organizations kind of leaning in, I think the strongest programs I've seen are those that kind of depend on a network of people. And those are the ones that seem to sustain themselves the longest, rather than one person who is really charismatic, who cares about it, but then eventually has to retire because people can't work forever, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. We've seen these wonderful programs, unfortunately, come and go. And I think that is one of the missing pieces, is engaging your community, engaging partners. I know that's been one of the keys to the success of Hope Crew. We could not do it without partnership. It started as a one-person initiative with our program founder, Monica Rhodes, and now we are a small 2-person team, myself and Milan Jordan, our program director, and we couldn't do it without partners.
So where do you go from here? Obviously, you've talked about updating it, doing that kind of work around it. I mean, your day job is involved in the trade, so it's not like you're giving up on the trades. You're doing it every day. But what's next for you? What are you hoping to accomplish next?
Yeah, so I've already been able to participate in a webinar to share a little bit about the program guide, in addition to the closing recording that I presented to the committee that so generously supported me through this fellowship. But yeah, I want to continue to present at conferences, share this through the vast network that we come in contact with by means of our work. Anywhere where I can see a need, I want to share this, and not only share this, but share the successes of other programs and point them to these other programs that have had success. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of in this guide. It's shouting out the people that have been doing this work and have been working so hard to get these programs off the ground, and who are so willing to share why it was successful.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, a rising tide lifts all boats here. And I think that there is a sense within the community that we should all be helping each other. And that is one of the positive sides to what we're seeing right now, is that there's no one who's really feeling like they have to hold on to things, because the need is so great. And there's also so much interest in it that no one institution or one organization could possibly handle all of this, and that it really is going to take sort of that push, that effort. So before we go, we always ask people their favorite historic place or site, and then we've kind of gotten easy on it recently, and we'll say, because people hem and haw, and we'll say, well, the coolest you've been to recently.
Coolest I've been to recently. Okay. I went to a distillery that is in an old castle that was built in rural Kentucky. The distillery's Castle and Key, and the way that they've taken about, I want to say it's been 12 years to restore this property, and it's extensive. I just went this week, is why it's fresh in my mind. They've turned it back into a beautiful space for events, and they're distilling bourbon again. And I just love that they were able to use the original intent of the building once again. I'm all for adaptive use. That's the coolest thing, when people can find new uses for spaces, but it feels meaningful that this space is still useful this day and age. It was built back at the turn of the 20th century, and that they've been able to revive it in such a beautiful way. It was really cool to observe. So that would be my most recent favorite. I wouldn't say that's my favorite of all time. There's certainly other places that I find really dear to my heart that inspired me down this path in preservation, but that's pretty cool. I would recommend anyone in the Kentucky vicinity check it out, because it's rad.
Well, that is our first Kentucky castle too, so that's good. Well, Molly, it's been fun chatting with you. Looking forward to seeing you, present on this at upcoming conferences. And we'll put the link in the show notes. Go take a look at this. It's valuable, no matter how you're coming at trades or preservation. It's worth taking a look at, and hope you do that. Thanks so much for joining us today, Molly.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.